facilities have been obliterated. Underground, they're buried, and we're watching them 24/7. So we know where any nuclear material
reclaiming
might be.
my time for
we're
just
watching
a quick second here. We had to start this war, you just said, 60 days ago, because the nuclear weapon was an imminent threat. Now you're saying that it was completely obliterated?
They had not given up their nuclear ambitions, and they had a conventional shield of thousands of missiles.
So Operation Midnight Hammer accomplished nothing of substance. It left us at exactly the same place we were before. So much so
their
that
facilities were bombed and obliterated. Their ambitions continued, and they're building a conventional shield.
All right, let me try again.
It's the North Korea strategy. You know this very well. The North Korea strategy was use conventional missiles to prevent anybody from challenging them, so they could slow walk their way to a weapon. President Trump saw Iran at its weakest moment, took an action to ensure, in a way that only the United States of America could.
Hegseth's words expose a glaring inconsistency that collapses the entire premise of the conflict. If the nuclear facilities are now described as obliterated underground and buried under tons of rubble in the mountains, then how could the 2 weeks to a nuclear weapon have ever constituted an imminent threat that forced his hand just 60 days earlier? The senator's sharp interruption, reclaiming my time, forces Hegseth into an awkward scramble, where he abandons the original justification and shifts to, they had not given up their nuclear ambitions, and the need to counter a conventional shield of thousands of missiles, echoing the North Korea strategy. This rhetorical pivot, as Daniel Davis immediately labels radically different justifications, reveals not just sloppy testimony but a fundamental undermining of the war's legal and moral foundation. Operation Midnight Hammer, which Hegseth defends, is dismissed in real time as nothing of substance that left us exactly the same place we were before. By admitting the facilities were already bombed and obliterated, yet ambitions continued, Hegseth inadvertently proves the strikes achieved zero strategic gain while creating new problems. The entire exchange highlights how the administration's narrative keeps changing on the fly, from imminent nuclear danger to we hit them at their weakest moment, making the justification feel reactive and fabricated rather than evidence-based. Colonel McGregor later reinforces this by calling it a self-dug hole that the officials can't get out of, showing how such public contradictions erode trust not only with Congress but with global audiences watching the testimony unfold live. Short takeaway: shifting justifications from imminent threat to facilities obliterated expose a hollow case for war and destroy credibility. What do you think? Does this flip reveal a rushed decision or deliberate deception?
I think Prime Minister Netanyahu is much better at making these points, and that's not surprising since these are Netanyahu's talking points. I'm afraid that Hegseth has probably gotten a little tongue-tied here and worked himself into a corner. He should have stuck with the basic lie that's being told from the beginning, that Iran was building a nuclear weapon and continues to do so. Instead, he's made the mistake of essentially echoing President Trump's comments that the nuclear capability was buried and therefore no longer exists. You can't make this stuff up. These people want it every way and sideways and as deep as possible. Now they can't get out of the hole they've dug for themselves. No, but once again, that's a talking point from Prime Minister Netanyahu, and he seems to be calling the tune to which everybody is dancing. I think we can also say with absolute certainty that everyone watching this atrocity unfold in front of us has concluded that if you don't want to be attacked by the United States or Israel or both, you really need a nuclear weapon. So I'm surprised nobody at the hearing brought that up, that if you really are judging this from a very objective standpoint, then I think Mr. Hegseth and President Trump are both ensuring that in the future, nuclear weapons will proliferate.
McGregor's blunt assessment cuts straight to the heart of the testimony's damage. Hegseth worked himself into a corner by deviating from the basic lie that's been told from the beginning, and instead echoing President Trump's own recent statements that the nuclear capability was buried and therefore no longer exists. This creates an inescapable contradiction. You can't claim both imminent threat and obliterated in the same breath without looking incoherent. McGregor, drawing on his decades of experience as a 4-time combat veteran and former advisor to the Secretary of Defense, points out that no intelligence assessments plus anything public support the claim that Iran hadn't given up on their ambitions, calling it pure talking point from Prime Minister Netanyahu. The deeper danger, McGregor warns, is that the entire atrocity unfolding in front of us sends an unmistakable global message. If you don't want to be attacked by the United States or Israel or both, you really need a nuclear weapon. This observation flips the official narrative on its head. Rather than preventing proliferation, the war and its contradictory justifications are actively accelerating it. By naming Netanyahu as the one calling the tune to which everybody is dancing, McGregor exposes how foreign policy talking points appear to override American intelligence and strategic interests. The result is not just embarrassment in the hearing room but long-term strategic blowback. Allies and adversaries alike now see U.S. decision-making as driven by external scripts rather than facts, further isolating Washington on the world stage. Takeaway: echoing foreign talking points while contradicting U.S. intelligence turns a war into a proliferation accelerator. Follow World Talk Recap for more sharp geopolitical breakdowns and unfiltered analysis.
I think the objective was, from the very beginning, to bring Iran to a point where it is willing to subjugate or subordinate itself to Israel's demands. That Iran would reach a point where they understand it is best to essentially neutralize yourself, go along with whatever Israel wants, because if you do that, you'll be left alone, at least insofar as the Israelis are concerned. And I think that purpose has failed miserably. I think with each successive attack, Iran has become more and more convinced that it must fight to the bitter end because it's essentially the last man standing in the region. I think the Iranians continue to communicate with the Turks and the Egyptians, two potentially powerful states who could intervene in this conflict and bring it to a rapid close. But neither are willing to do that because neither of them want to go to war with us. But I think the region is reaching a point where they've begun to understand that we are the arm of Israel and that we're going to continue to do whatever it is that Israel wants, regardless of the consequences. So when you go through your purpose, method, end state, the purpose was, what did it start? We're going to bomb in support of an uprising. That failed. Purpose number 2, we're going to decapitate the regime. We're going to topple the regime. We're going to replace the regime. That failed. Number 3, having failed to replace the regime, well, then we're going to utterly destroy the Iranian state and nation. Well, that didn't work. We ran out of munitions. And the Iranians demonstrated that they could effectively nullify our influence. So now we're at a different set of crossroads. We still are insisting that Iran must agree to Israel's terms, but we've said those terms are largely about a nuclear weapon. And again, the Iranians had, as you point out, said they don't want a nuclear weapon. My point is now, I think, if you're an Iranian, particularly under the age of 30 or under the age of 40, you're beginning to conclude that you absolutely must have a nuclear weapon. So I think we've now radicalized the youth, the younger generation of Iranians, to the point where they're going to fight tooth and nail forever. And I think the other problem that we've got is that nobody believes anything we say. How many times can you change your argument? How many times can you alter the theme and then come back and expect somebody to believe anything that you commit to? I think that's the other problem.
McGregor applies his long-standing military framework of purpose, method, and end state to devastating effect, revealing a complete absence of coherent strategy from the outset. The original purpose, bombing in support of an uprising, collapsed immediately, forcing a desperate pivot to decapitate the regime, topple the regime, replace the regime, which also failed miserably. When that didn't work, the goalposts moved again to utterly destroy the Iranian state and nation, only to run into munitions shortages and Iran's demonstrated ability to effectively nullify our influence. Now, at this different set of crossroads, the demand has shrunk to forcing Iran to agree to Israel's terms, focused on nuclear weapons, even though, as McGregor and the host both note, Iran had categorically said that they were not going to a nuclear weapon prior to the strikes. This constant shifting of objectives, McGregor explains, has backfired catastrophically. Each successive attack has made Iran more and more convinced that it must fight to the bitter end because it's essentially the last man standing in the region. Most alarmingly, the younger generation, particularly under the age of 30 or under the age of 40, is now beginning to conclude that you absolutely must have a nuclear weapon, creating a radicalized cohort that will fight tooth and nail forever. The analysis exposes not just tactical incompetence, but a profound strategic failure that has turned a limited operation into a generational conflict, with Iran now communicating with potential allies like Turkey and Egypt while the U.S. finds itself diplomatically isolated. Takeaway: endless goalpost moving radicalizes the next generation and guarantees prolonged resistance. Could repeated goalpost moving actually create the very nuclear threat it claimed to prevent?
Koreans have wanted operational command and control of their own armed forces for many years now. Right now, the Korean armed forces are under the command of an Army 4-star, who is the commander of U.S. Forces Korea. He is also the combined joint UN commander that disposes over the Koreans as well as over American forces. They want to get out of that. Now, we can talk about why. Well, first of all, Korea is now an immensely powerful state. They have, approaching 40 to 50 million people. They have a tremendous scientific industrial base. It's increasingly clear that North Korea is not going to attack because North Korea has been told by both Moscow and Beijing not to do that. The Koreans are doing a land office business with China. They see, and so do the Japanese, by the way, the hostilities emerging between us and China. Neither Korea nor Japan want to be dragged into a war against China. Now, you put all of that together, and they are being as polite as possible, but they're privately telling us to get the hell out of Korea. We should. We've been there for 70 years. There's no requirement for us to be there anymore. There hasn't been for a long time. They can defend themselves. And most of all, they want peace in Asia, which, by the way, is what everybody else in Asia wants. We're the ones that keep talking about war in Asia, not the Chinese, not the Koreans, and not the Japanese. So I think this is more evidence of our imperial overstretch that's worn out its welcome. And the vassal states that have lived within this framework want out from under us. And that includes Korea. And I think you'll soon see the same thing happen in Japan. Well, it's not just incompetence. It's viewing the current president and, frankly, the government as a whole, because Congress, as we know, just from the recent voting that's gone on about the War Powers Act and so forth, Congress is actively supporting the president. So if you're sitting in Korea or Japan, you're sitting almost anywhere in Asia, you like to do business with us. You don't dislike us. You want to be on good terms with us. But you see us as kind of this rogue power, this dangerous, contagious patient that has to be kept down at the end of the hall in the hospital. The guys in the white coats are waiting to take us away as far as the Asians are concerned, because they don't see the justification or the rationale or the need for conflict, period. We are the ones that have created the conflicted region of the Middle East and created and potentially could create similar conflict in Asia. So I think people have had it with us, and I'm surprised that more of this has not happened sooner. But people in Asia are nothing if not patient, and they all desperately want to be polite. But this is all going to fall apart on Donald Trump's watch.
The South Korean announcement to reclaim operational control by 2028 and defend themselves without foreign troops is, in McGregor's view, far more than a bureaucratic adjustment. It represents a tectonic shift driven directly by America's demonstrated imperial overstretch. Currently, South Korean forces remain under the command of a U.S. 4-star general who also serves as combined joint UN commander, a 70-year arrangement that a now powerful South Korea, with 40 to 50 million people and a tremendous scientific industrial base, no longer accepts. McGregor notes that both Seoul and Tokyo see the hostilities emerging between us and China and refuse to be dragged into a war against China, preferring instead to continue their land office business with China and pursue peace in Asia. The blunt private message to Washington, "Get the hell out of Korea," signals that America's Asian allies now view the U.S. as a liability rather than a protector. This decoupling is accelerated by the incompetence displayed in the Iran conflict, proving to allies that Washington cannot be relied upon. McGregor predicts the same dynamic will soon play out in Japan, underscoring a broader rejection of the post-World War II security architecture. The vassal states that have lived within this framework want out from under us. The analysis reveals how one regional misadventure is unraveling America's entire Pacific posture, with patient Asian nations politely but firmly ending 7 decades of dependence. Takeaway: imperial overstretch is causing even close allies to quietly walk away. Follow World Talk Recap for more sharp geopolitical breakdowns and unfiltered analysis.
Do you know how long it took for the United States to have its first major victory in World War II? In the Pacific theater?
A number of years.
No, it was actually 6 months. It was the Battle of Midway, all right? It was a turning point of World War II. Could you imagine if we had had the same Democrats asking then Secretary of War, all right, gee, it's been 2 months, okay, and we haven't won this war yet. Back then, we didn't win a major battle for 6 months. Your job, the job of the military, what you've done in the first 2 months is extraordinary.
Well, I think the gentleman forgets that the Japanese attacked us at Pearl Harbor. And that precipitated the mobilization of the United States for war. Iran has not attacked us. It has not attacked our CONUS or continental-based forces. It hasn't attacked us at Pearl Harbor. It hasn't attacked us in Korea or Japan. It is not attacking us or has not been attacking us in the Middle East. Now you listen to people and say, well, that's not true. Those Iranians, they were pushing those Iraqis and look at what happened to us. Well, I've got news for you. We supported Saddam Hussein and Iraq and the Iraqi armed forces in its war with Iran. And Saddam Hussein and his Iraqi forces killed some 800,000 people on the Iranian side. And we not only supplied them with weapons and equipment and training and advice, we actually encouraged Saddam Hussein to use chemical weapons against Iran. So this is the way the real world views us. This is the way the Iranians are viewing us. So I think that particular politician, I don't know what his name is living on another planet. He's certainly not on planet Earth, and he doesn't understand what's at risk here or what's at stake, because we're moving away from simply trying to beat Iran into submission because of what Israel wants, to a setting that could ultimately accelerate our descent into a regional war that could become global. Nobody seems to get that. But then again, we kind of live on planet America.
The congressman's glowing comparison, claiming the first 2 months of the Iran operation were extraordinary, and likening it to the 6 months it took for America's first major victory at the Battle of Midway in World War II, is shredded by McGregor as historically illiterate and dangerously detached. McGregor immediately points out the fatal flaw. Japan attacked us at Pearl Harbor, mobilizing the entire nation, whereas Iran has not attacked us. It has not attacked our continental-based forces. It hasn't attacked us at Pearl Harbor. He further dismantles the analogy by recalling uncomfortable history. The U.S. once supported Saddam Hussein and Iraq in its war with Iran, supplying weapons and equipment and training and advice, and even encouraged Saddam Hussein to use chemical weapons that killed some 800,000 people on the Iranian side. This reminder exposes the hypocrisy of portraying Iran as the aggressor when America's own past actions helped shape the region's grievances. The politician's insistence that the military's performance has been extraordinary despite zero strategic gains is dismissed as someone living on another planet who doesn't understand what's at risk here or what's at stake. McGregor warns this fantasy mindset risks accelerating descent into a regional war that could become global, showing how domestic political cheerleading ignores both history and current reality, further damaging U.S. credibility abroad. Takeaway: false historical analogies and selective memory reveal dangerous detachment from reality. Is comparing a non-attacking Iran to Pearl Harbor the ultimate sign of strategic denial?
I think it's disappointing that the President of the United States presents his views and opinions in the form of a comic strip, because that's effectively what we're looking at. This is a very superficial glance at something which is equally superficial, and that is Trump's approach to this entire matter. There's no maturity, there's no balance, there's no real diplomacy, there's no serious thinking about the strategic implications for us, let alone the rest of the world. And the rest of the world right now is really very, very close to walking away from us completely. So let's stop and look at these three options. Let's start with the last one. declare victory and walk away. Well, fine, declare victory. The only people that are going to take that seriously are people probably in the White House. Now, the good news is that most Americans are not interested in this. They don't support the war. So frankly, from his standpoint, ending this conflict is an easy win for Donald Trump. He would be applauded for doing so. But we have the third party. It's called Israel. That's unacceptable. So scrap declaring victory and walking away. 2, blockade. How effective is the blockade? Well, it's very effective right now insofar as going to breed famine all over the global south. It's reducing Europe to ruins. It's creating conditions all over the world conducive to panic and destruction. Why? Because there are 47 different types of petroleum products that can't get out of the Persian Gulf. He's not really hurting Iran. Iran will stay the course. There is no evidence that Iran is going to wake up tomorrow morning and say, please, please don't harm us anymore. The exact opposite is the case. We have an increasingly radicalized population, particularly under the age of 40, that wants no more discussion and no more negotiations with us under any circumstances. So the blockade is going to do more damage to us as a country and ultimately more damage to the rest of the world than it's going to harm Iran. In fact, Iran will probably come out of this looking like a superhero compared to us, given where we're headed. And that leads us to the last option, which is go back, repeat what you did before with more violence, more munitions, more forces. Will that work? I doubt it very seriously, but I think that's what he considers to be probably his best option. He's put everything on the line. His presidency right now is on the line. His survival in office is on the line. If he took option 3, I think he could survive. Option 2 will not keep him there. Will option 1 keep him in office? Well, he may think so, because he may say, I may get lucky. The problem with the first option is the Chinese, the Russians, the Indians, everybody around the world that's watching this, everybody in Europe is sort of suspending disbelief that we would be this barbarous and this stupid to put everything on the line for a war against a country that threatens none of them. So I think he'll go for option 1, because I don't think he gives a damn what happens around the world. I don't think he gives a damn about anything or anybody else. So I think you're going to get option 1. Hope I'm wrong.
According to recent leaks reported by Axios, President Trump is weighing 3 options. Extend the blockade, which he reportedly sees as somewhat more effective than the bombing. Declare victory and walk away, or double down with more military action. McGregor finds it disappointing that the president presents his views in the form of a comic strip via an AI-generated meme, calling it a very superficial glance that reveals no maturity, no balance, no real diplomacy, no serious thinking about the strategic implications. Analyzing each choice clinically, McGregor dismisses declare victory and walk away as politically appealing to Americans who largely don't support the war, but impossible because the third party, called Israel, finds it unacceptable. The blockade option, while currently hurting Iran less than intended, is devastating globally. It blocks 47 different types of petroleum products, breeding famine all over the global south and reducing Europe to ruins. Meanwhile, it is radicalizing Iran's youth under the age of 40, who now want no more discussion and no more negotiations. The final option, repeating past violence with more munitions, more forces, is what McGregor believes Trump favors because he's put everything on the line and his presidency is on the line. Yet it offers the least chance of success. The analysis exposes a leader trapped by external pressures, choosing superficial tactics over strategic wisdom and risking even greater isolation. Takeaway: all 3 options carry massive risks, with only declare victory offering a domestic win that external pressures block. Follow World Talk Recap for more sharp geopolitical breakdowns and unfiltered analysis.
In November, it talks to you about weekly exports through the Strait of Hormuz in terms of tons of fertilizer. We are effectively reversing the Green Revolution. we're robbing the world of access to the fertilizer it desperately needs to grow the food to support the population we have today. And if you look at that, nothing is coming out of the Gulf. And neither the Russians nor we nor anybody else can produce enough to export and help others. In fact, there was a letter sent to the President of the United States that was signed by leaders in the agricultural arena. They were talking about farmers. Right now, bankruptcy among farmers is up 46%. And the farmers in the United States are in real danger because they too can't afford the fertilizer, because the price of fertilizer has risen dramatically. So we're going to suffer. We're going to have less available. We are going to have shortfalls on the shelves inside of the various food marts. We're going to have a lot more people showing up at the food banks. Only the food banks aren't going to be able to help them very much because they won't have additional food. Trump doesn't seem to understand this. And from the very beginning, he always had the option of coming forward after the failure of this first operation and say, look, on humanitarian grounds, as the president of the United States, and he styles himself the leader of the free world, although I think that falls on deaf ears now, I am going to suspend this operation because it's in the interest of the world to stop. Well, he's not going to do that. And so he's throwing our farmers under the bus. He's throwing the American population standard of living under the bus. He's throwing much of the world under the bus. He doesn't seem to care.
That you had highlighted, Doug.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. In other words, go back in and try yet again to kill everyone in the government that could possibly contribute to a negotiation. Well, that makes great sense. If there's nobody to negotiate with you, well, then just kill everybody. This is by Mark Thiessen. And as I recollect, Mark Thiessen was a speechwriter for President Bush, which is a frightening prospect, but I think that may explain much. But he certainly is a bloodthirsty individual, and I don't know what that stems from. That looks like blind, unreasoned hatred.
And when
McGregor uses a stark chart of weekly exports through the Strait of Hormuz in terms of tons of fertilizer to illustrate self-inflicted global harm. Exports have slowed to a trickle in recent months, effectively reversing the green revolution and robbing the world of access to the fertilizer it desperately needs. This has already driven U.S. farmer bankruptcy rates up 46%, with American farmers unable to afford skyrocketing prices, leading to empty shelves, more food bank lines, and broader scarcity. He ties this directly to the administration's refusal to suspend operations on humanitarian grounds, accusing it of throwing our farmers under the bus. The American population standard of living under the bus. Much of the world under the bus. Adding to the reputational damage, McGregor highlights a Washington Post column by Mark Thiessen urging renewed strikes to kill everyone in the government that could possibly contribute to a negotiation, calling it blind, unreasoned hatred from a former Bush speechwriter. The cumulative effect, McGregor concludes, has transformed America from the city on a hill, once an admired example, to a leper colony that nobody's going to want to do business with. The analysis paints a picture of cascading consequences. Economic pain at home, humanitarian disaster abroad, and a collapse in international trust that will outlast any tactical gains. Takeaway: self-harm through global supply disruption turns America from beacon to pariah. What happens when the world's former city on a hill becomes a global pariah?
We have said that we would deliver on the 90 billion loan for Ukraine one way or the other. Now we made good on this promise. We will disperse the first tranche of 45 billion euros for 2026, still this quarter. 1/3 for budgetary needs and 2/3 go to Ukraine's defense. And the first defense package will be on drones from Ukraine to Ukraine, worth some 6 billion euros. So our message is very clear. We will continue our support to the brave Ukrainian people and their armed forces.
Well, that's a good question. I'm sure they'll find a way to print some. I mean, that's all I can say. Whether or not it's going to be worth much is open to debate, especially if things go in the direction I think they're going to go here in the United States in the near future. And all you have to do is turn on Ray Dalio. Even Jamie Dimon finally is admitting that the bond market is in great risk right now of essentially catching fire in the sense that you end up with yields that are just impossible to ever pay. And all these things are coming. But let's keep something in mind. Von der Leyen was the Secretary or Minister of Defense in Germany. And one of her great contributions was to tell the manufacturers of armored fighting vehicles that they had to adapt seating inside armored fighting vehicles. We're talking about Martyrs, we're talking about Pumas, we're talking about various kinds of equipment to accommodate pregnant German women so that they could ride into battle. The last thing I would want if I had a daughter and she were pregnant was to stick her in an armored fighting vehicle and send her into combat. But this is the level of craziness. And on top of that, von der Leyen is from the state of Germany that is being systematically deindustrialized, all because of the hate fest that she and others have helped to start against Russia. And unfortunately, Europe is a place with long memories, and people can be convinced of things that aren't true based on what happened 80, 85 years ago. Trying to tell someone that the Russians today have nothing to do with the Soviet troops that raped millions of women and killed millions of people on their way into Europe doesn't really register with a lot of people that don't understand the difference, don't understand how profoundly different Russia is today. So they are the Pied Pipers leading this entire population straight into hell. The Germans are going to have to wake up. Now, the good news is that the Alternative for Germany has now scored enormous success at the ballot box, and they won 28% of the vote. Now, people in the United States say, well, that's not much. No. You have to understand, when you look at the multiplicity of parties and the percentages that others have, the Alternative for Germany, by any normal standard, should have a role in governing Germany. And of course, von der Leyen and her friends are going to throw themselves onto in front of the on-rushing locomotive to stop that if necessary, because, God forbid, the Alternative for Germany would throw out most of the migrants that have come into Germany since 2015 under Merkel. And that's something that is desperately needed, not just in Germany, but across Europe. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But if the Alternative for Germany is barred from any future government, I don't think Germany is going to last too much longer as a true republic. There will be uprisings in Germany. And by the way, this is one of the reasons that President Putin has exercised as much restraint as he has, because he would prefer that the Europeans conclude that he really is not the enemy. But the only way for that to happen is to remove these globalists, these anti-nationalists, these internationalists who want to destroy Europe from power. And that hasn't happened yet, but I think we're getting closer. That's the good news.
While the Iran conflict dominates headlines, McGregor turns to the parallel Ukraine theater, where the EU has pushed through yet another sanctions package on Russia and approved a massive $90 billion loan to Ukraine, half earmarked for defense, including €6 billion for drones produced in Ukraine with Western components. He immediately notes that 50% of this will end up in offshore accounts belonging to Zelensky, parliament members, and senior officers due to rampant corruption. The remaining funds will buy more drones capable of striking deep into Russia, including 1,000+ miles to the northern Caspian Sea, actions that McGregor says have infuriated the Russian population and are pushing ordinary Russians to demand Putin flatten Ukraine. Putin himself addressed the strikes as openly terrorist methods, emphasizing that the enemy is unable to stop the advance of our troops and is losing territory daily, while announcing plans to hold elections in the 4 new Russian regions for the first time. McGregor predicts Russia could seize Odessa very quickly, rendering Ukraine landlocked and dependent on Poland, setting the stage for the final dissolution of Ukraine. The analysis shows how Western billions and drones, far from turning the tide, are actually hardening Russian resolve and accelerating the very outcome Europe claims to fear. Takeaway: more Western aid and drones fuel Russian determination rather than weakening it. Could more Western billions and drones actually hasten Ukraine's final dissolution?